Our next presenter comes to us all the way from across the pond. He comes to us today with a background in the music industry, learning the truths behind what many of us know to be a world of corruption, mind control, and so much more. He hosts a podcast, he's a DJ, he's an author, he has an upcoming book called Musical Truths. He's a rock star, I guess DJ and rock star synonymous, and he's one of the most passionate whistleblowers on the music industry that I've seen in quite a long time. There's been many of them. But for this Free Your Mind conference, please help me welcome Mark Devlin, please.
Thanks, Bob. I was going to steal my gag about a cup of tea there. So, I was going to say morning, folks, but it's afternoon now. Mine is the token English accent at Free Your Mind. So, I'm probably going to be saying bloody a lot. And I might end it by saying cheers. And I might be pausing for a cup of tea at some point. So, this talk is titled The Mind Control Manipulations of the Mainstream Music Industry. And there's so many facets to it. I could talk for 10 hours today if I was really going to go into all the techniques involved. I've encapsulated it down to an hour, so we're just going to get the good stuff today. By way of a brief bit of background, I've been a DJ for the last 25 years, radio and club DJ, and a music journalist. I've specialised in hip-hop, that's real hip-hop, and other forms of black music. And I've been fortunate enough to travel to around 40 different countries. I've DJ'd in the US a few times, never been to Philly, but I've played up in New York on a few occasions. And for most of this time, I just went through the motions and did everything that was expected of you as a DJ and didn't really give any thought to what might be going on behind the scenes or whether there might be any kind of agenda in place with the music that I was playing. And around about 2007, 2008, I'd started asking a lot of questions about what was really going on in the world and what this world is anyway and what the nature of this reality is in which we find ourselves. And this was the result of having done a lot of reading, a lot of researching, different authors. Graham Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods was a mind-blowing book for me. Also, somebody put me on to the first Zeitgeist movie, and I did a lot of reading of the books of David Icke. And it was in 2010 when I was on a trip to New York, and I was reading David Icke's Human Race Get Off Your Knees. And everything just came together in my mind in terms of an understanding of the true nature of this world, who's running it, nature of reality, our place in it, and all of that. Everything just seemed to make sense for the first time. And I came to realise that the world is nothing like we're told it is. And I came to realise that the world is not run by the people we're told it is. And it occurred to me, as I'm sure it has to most people in this room, that politicians, presidents, prime ministers are just puppets for the real controllers who are really calling the shots. And these are individuals who are obsessed with dark occult practices and rituals, and they operate through various secret societies, and over a vast period of time they've come to hijack and control and manipulate pretty much every aspect of daily human life. So they've got politics locked down, they've got the educational establishments, colleges, universities and such locked down, they've got the military, the world of science, medicine, all the big corporations. And if they've done all that, why would they not take the time and trouble to lock down the entertainment business with all the brilliant opportunities that it offers for mind control and social engineering? And so my special area of interest was looking at how this has been applied to the music industry. And I came to realise that the business of which I'd been a part and the music that I'd been playing was very much part of a far-reaching agenda which ties into all these other aspects of daily human life. My old dad always used to say to me, there's no such thing as a free lunch. It's a simple truth, and he was absolutely right. Everything comes with a price. There's always a price to pay. And when it comes to fame and fortune and celebrity, if you are a household name that is revered and adored and worshipped by millions, there will have been a price to pay for you to have got there. And it will be quite a heavy price. There was a movie which came out in 1968. It's a gothic horror classic directed by Roman Polanski, and it's called Rosemary's Baby. And it's an incredible film. On the surface narrative, you've got this young couple, played by Mia Farrow and John Cassavetes, and they move into an apartment block in New York. And it just happens to be the Dakota building, outside which John Lennon was assassinated in 1980. And the guy is a wannabe actor. He's a struggling actor. He's trying to make it big in the game. He's not having much success. And this young couple unwittingly fall in with a group of Satanists. And they don't appear to be Satanists on the surface. It's the old couple that are their neighbours, and some of their family friends, and a doctor. But it turns out that everyone around them is part of this network of Satanists. And they make this guy an offer, which is that they will fix it for him to become a successful actor, but there's a heavy price that he has to pay. And in the case of the movie, it's allowing his wife to be impregnated by this demonic entity, which is identified as the devil. So I'm not suggesting that every artist in the business has to allow their partner to be impregnated by a demonic entity, but I would suggest that there is a lot of truth in the narrative of this movie, and it's very far from a work of fiction. I think what was being communicated by Roman Polanski is an insight into what is required in the entertainment business, whether that's Hollywood movies, or the world of television, or the music industry, in order to make it big. The price to pay is pretty heavy. There's this legend of the blues musician Robert Johnson. It's a sort of Faustian deal that he's said to have made with the devil, this entity known as the devil, at the crossroads. And in exchange for great musical talent as a musician, he's said to have sold his soul to the devil. And it's always been taken to be a myth, but some very strange elements of the story, not least the fact that Robert Johnson died at the age of 27 in some very strange circumstances. And I think there could be some truth to this idea of selling your soul in exchange for great fame. This guy, Professor Griff, formerly of the hip-hop group Public Enemy, has gone into some of the initiation rituals which are required of artists in the hip-hop business in order to make it big. He's talked about it in his books and his YouTube videos and public talks. Griff has had his house burnt down, he's been poisoned, and he's been shot at many times. And this does tend to be validation that you might just be onto something. And he tells a story about how many prominent hip-hop artists, the sort of things that they have to do in exchange to make it big. And he tells a story about this guy, Sean Combs, aka Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, whatever the hell he's calling himself this week. And the story that Griff tells is that apparently Puffy, along with many others it would seem, was required to go through an occult ritual which involved lying naked in a coffin, surrounded by his peers, masturbating and recounting his entire sexual history. This is apparently a version of an initiation ritual that takes place within the Skull and Bones Society at Yale University. They've got a version of it for the music industry. And no coincidence that Puffy crops up time and time again in the Forbes hip-hop rich list. because they do one of those. And in the top 3 of that, for many years, you found Puffy, Dr. Dre, and Jay-Z. All highly compromised artists, it turns out. And it's not as if they don't give their little symbols and their little clues as to what's going on. The dark forces that control the music business and the A-list artists that they use do tend to leave their calling cards everywhere and give you little reminders of who's running the show. This ties into Sigil Magic, which is what John and Bonnie Mitchell were talking about in the video that we saw on Friday evening. Very much connected to what goes on in the music game. So often with Jay-Z, you see him flashing up this hand signal, this triangular sort of arrangement. And the cover story that is always given for it, and the way that Jay-Z has explained it, is that it's the rock sign. It's said to be the depiction of a diamond. And this ties into the name of Jay-Z's record label, which initially was Rockefeller Records. Interesting choice of name. These days it's called Rock Nation. But there was a video on YouTube, which is not there anymore, but from 2009, where Jay-Z was saying he invented this sign. And it was the rock sign, it symbolizes a diamond, and it's the bling culture of hip-hop. But it's not the only time you see this particular symbol. There's Kanye West, his stooge mate, doing it as well. Here's Beyonce, who flashed up this symbol, Mrs. Jay-Z, of course, at a Grammy Awards ceremony a couple of years ago. And here is Anton Lavey, High Priest of the Church of Satan, who just happens to be doing the same symbol back in the 1960s. And it turns out to be known as a triangle of manifestation. And the idea is that it symbolizes the unity of mind, body, spirit, thoughts, emotions, actions. And when you've got those 3 elements in balance and all working together, you are supposed to be able to imbue this symbol with your will and your intent of whatever you wish to manifest into physical reality. So a little bit different to a diamond celebrating hip-hop bling culture. And what you get at Jay-Z concerts is he will throw up the instruction for all the fans to put their rock signs in the air, and on instruction you have sort of 10,000 people in a stadium all throwing up this sign. And it raises the interesting question of what it might be that sign has been imbued and empowered with in terms of the will and the intent of those that are creating it. Another simple calling card that we see time and time again is prominent artists covering one eye or highlighting one eye in some way. A couple of examples of Rihanna doing it, a couple of examples of Lady Gaga. And here's every other goddamn artist in the entire industry. If you have a favourite musician who has had a hit record in the last 5 years, they'll be in that picture somewhere. People say it's just a coincidence. People say they're doing it to be cool, it's just a way of being fashionable. This, to me, goes way beyond the realms of coincidence. Don't know about you, just the way I feel about it. Another symbol that we see a lot, Beyonce, once again, throwing up the sign that's supposed to mean okay. Everything's okay, everything's cool. We see this time and time again. Here's a young Michael Jackson, flashing up the same symbol. Okay, before we go to that one. All these signs and symbols come with innocent-sounding cover stories. So Jay-Z tells you it's the rock sign. This one is supposed to mean okay, but I think most people have realised that there's another connotation of this sign, which is that it's the formation of a 6. And when you've got the 3 fingers extended as well, it's implying 6 to the power of 3, or 3 sixes, 666, number of the beast in the book of Revelation. Here's Eminem giving us a nice family-friendly sign.
And the one eye.
Yep, and the one eye also, 2 for the price of 1. And this one, it's all to do with the way the thumb is extended, but the cover story for this one, or the innocent version of it, is that it's supposed to mean I love you. It says that, doesn't it? And it's supposed to be part of sign language for the deaf that was invented by this woman called Helen Keller decades ago. And so when you see that sign being done in public, it's supposed to mean I love you. It's supposed to be a capital I, capital L, and a U arranged in some way so that it's represented by that. Now, here's your last president, Village Idiot Bush, when inbreeding goes wrong. And he's just the sort of fella to say I love you in public, isn't he, really? Really goes. Here's the current president, who just happens to be doing the same sign, more or less. And here's your next president. Good luck with that one. Let me know how it works out for you. So of course they're all saying I love you, because they like that, they care. But here is what I and many other researchers think is being evoked here. It's Baphomet, this androgynous horned entity, which is very much beloved of the dark forces controlling the music industry. You see depictions of Baphomet cropping up time and time again in videos and all sorts of other things. And so this symbol that you see politicians doing as well as musicians, I would suggest is an evocation of Baphomet. And incredibly, there are still people in the world, particularly in the UK, that think Russell Brand is some kind of genuine representative for critical thinking truth seekers everywhere. And they seem to think that Russell Brand is here to help us and save us and lead us. These pictures tell a different story. When it comes to red flags about Russell Brand, I could do an entire day's presentation on that alone. Anyone that still thinks Russell Brand is the real deal, I really don't know what to tell you. Okay, so we're sticking with a form of symbolism and also a form of sigil magic, and we're getting into the realms of what is known as predictive programming. And this is the placement of visual clues and visual symbols which depict an event which is yet to occur. It's encoded into works of popular culture, such as films, TV shows, videos, cartoons, and it is an encoded way of announcing something which is yet to occur. And there have been so many examples of this in recent years, and particularly in recent months. The rate is really being stepped up. And for every major terror, in inverted commas, event, or every false flag hoax using actors, because we get quite a lot of those these days, there will have been some work of popular culture which has foreshadowed what is to come. And people would ask, how can this be? Well, if the same forces ultimately that are directing these events and causing them to occur are the same forces that control the entertainment business, then you can understand how these symbols and these clues can be inserted into these works. So we'll look at a few examples, and then I'm going to give my view as to why I think it's happening. This was a scene from the Batman Dark Knight movie, and there's a scene in it where they're looking at a map of Gotham City. And for a split second, you see the word Sandy Hook, the name Sandy Hook. Not sure if you can see it on this slide, but that's what it says. In the earlier Batman movie, it was pointed out that they were also looking at a map of Gotham City, and it didn't say Sandy Hook for that particular region. It said South Hinckley. So for this movie, the place name was changed to Sandy Hook. And this movie was released just a few months before the shooting, or not, at the elementary school in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. What a coincidence. When it comes to 9/11, there are YouTube videos that go on for 25 minutes, consisting of clips of movies, TV shows, videos that have foreshadowed the events of September 11th, 2001. I've just selected a couple, but there are many, many more that you can find. This was from the movie Independence Day, and you see this clock counting down, and there just happens to be a split-second frame where you see 9/11/01. This is from the first Matrix movie, which was released in 1999, and it's the character Neo's passport, and it has an expiry date on it. And the expiry date just happens to be 11th of September 01. And now we get into some examples from the music industry. This is a record sleeve from the British rock group Supertramp. And it's for an album called Breakfast in America, and it came out in 1979. And on the sleeve, you get a view from an aeroplane window going over Manhattan. There's the Manhattan skyline, there's the Twin Towers, and there's the Supertramp logo going across the top of the picture. Somebody worked out, I don't know who, and I don't know how they ever come across these things, but somebody did. They worked out that if you reverse the image, make a mirror image of it, something interesting happens. Now,
Oh my God.
where you have the name Supertramp in reverse, the two characters at the end appear to be making a 9 and an 11, and they're positioned directly above the two Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. This was 1979. This was a little known hip hop album, wasn't a big hit, from a group that's not too well known, called The Coup. It was from an album called Party Music, and it was released in June 2001 with this original sleeve. And it depicts the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center exploding exactly the way they did 3 months after the album was released. And Boots Riley, the guy there, the frontman of the group, is said to have designed the sleeve. And he said that it was designed to be a statement against capitalism. And he said that, you know, when the events of September 11th happened, he was shocked at how this album seemed to foreshadow it. So who knows what the true story is there, but a very interesting sleeve to have come out at that point. And there's a more accurate rendering of what probably went on. This is Michael Jackson's Blood on the Dance Floor album. Interesting title, interesting Masonic checkerboard floor going on, interesting red suit, colours of Saturn, but don't have time for all that. In the background, you've got a city crumbling to dust, which looks very similar to Manhattan. This is the Amazon page for Jay-Z's iconic Blueprint album. And at the top there, you can see the date on which it was released. And the date just happens to be September 11th, 2001. What were the chances? September 11th, 2001 was a Tuesday. Most albums are released on a Monday. For some reason, this one was put out on this date. And a more recent example, a video from the rapper, it says here, Lil Wayne. Not my idea of a rapper, but maybe I'm getting old. And this was for a video for a song called My Home Is Still. It's a classic, look it up. And there's a scene in the video where he's in a movie theatre and he's surrounded by 12 skeletons. And this video was released a few days before 12 people, we're told, were shot, we're told, in a movie theatre in Aurora, Colorado. What a coincidence. So, this predictive programming, it doesn't matter whether the event in question happen the way we were told it did, because many of these events are false flag hoaxes, or they're staged using actors, but either way the intention is the same, which is to foreshadow what they know is to come. I'll explain that more in a while. I did just want to give you a little lyric from that little Wayne record. Thought you might enjoy it. This is the sort of stuff that the kids are getting down to these days, you know. This is hip-hop in 2012, 2015. I'm sure it's some great wisdom being communicated. One thing I do find interesting is the line, "I've got to put that patch over my third eye." I think that's probably happened. And then the chorus is, "Don't make my goons go stupid, go stupid, go stupid," which clearly you will if you listen to too much of this. Okay. This is a brilliant simplification of the central tenets of natural law. I love this. Really sums it up. Do no harm, but take no shit. It's the moral code of the universe set into place by the creative force behind the universe. I learned all my stuff about natural law from the work of Mark Passio, as I'm sure many of us did. And it's called many other things. It's known as universal law sometimes. Some people refer to it as karmic law, the law of cause and effect. But whatever the name, the principle is the same. It's consequentialism. Every action has a reaction. And we are bound by this. And the free will choices that we make and the behaviours that we take come with consequences, whether they're positive or negative. So you can expect to reap the consequences for the decisions you make. And here it is in slightly extended form. It's the non-aggression principle, the sacred feminine, which is the do no harm bit, and then the self-defense principle, the sacred masculine, take no shit. And put another way, do not treat others in a way you would not like to be treated yourself. It's a very simple truth. I can't help thinking that if everybody in the world were to observe it and live their lives by it, then it's a better deal for everyone. The world changes overnight, and humanity has a whole different experience to what it's having right now. But there doesn't appear to be anywhere near the level of understanding of this that there needs to be. But I believe, as do many other researchers, that the dark occultists, the dark magicians that are pulling the strings of the music industry understand this, and they understand that they are bound by it the same as everyone else is. What we are talking about, however, is psychopaths who are mentally ill, and they have a very skewed and twisted and warped interpretation of this and of how it applies to them. And I believe in their madness, they feel they can cheat the karmic consequences of natural law if they tell us what they're doing and what they plan to do. But they do it in a very deceptive, duplicitous, underhand kind of way, which is why they slyly encode it into things like movies, music videos and such. The general public is picking up on these things when it watches the movies, when it watches the videos, but it's going straight into the subliminal mind, because these symbols are the language of the subliminal mind. There's a great quote from the researcher and filmmaker Jay Widener, and he says, "If a picture is worth 1,000 words, a symbol is worth 1,000 pictures." And as we've heard from a couple of talks this weekend, they're looking to target the subliminal mind all the time and plant images and plant ideas in it below the threshold of the conscious mind, because it has a very powerful effect on people's behaviours. And so I think that's why they're doing this. I think there are other reasons as well. One of them is that by encoding a depiction of something that they know is to come, an event that they plan to pull off, into a work of popular culture, when that goes into the subliminal mind of large numbers of people, it creates a kind of familiarity with the event which is yet to happen. So that when it does, the subconscious mind is kind of recalling the fact that it's seen an element of it already, and it's more readily absorbed and more readily accepted into these people's minds. And another reason why predictive programming and all these symbols is done is because what's actually happening is it's a magic ritual which is taking place. It's all to do with the manipulation of energy, and you hear the phrase, energy goes where attention flows. And it's a two-way exchange of energy and attention. When you're watching one of these movies or one of these videos, the symbol is coming at you, your attention is going back to it, and on an unseen level, you're helping to empower it, and you're helping this magic ritual to take place, because it requires a participant, it requires a two-way exchange. So that's why I think we're seeing so many examples of this. There's another way in which symbols and ideas are implanted into the public consciousness. Besides the visual element, there's the audible element. And this is where we get into the very interesting area of backmasking. Subliminal messages in audio recordings. There have been suggestions of this going on for decades. The Beatles were famous for splicing backwards messages into their recordings. And they can only be understood when the record is played in reverse. And probably the most famous example of it is the classic Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin, who are a very interesting group when you get into the finer detail. Jimmy Page was absolutely obsessed with the works of Aleister Crowley, and he actually bought Crowley's house, Boleskine House, on the shores of Loch Ness in Scotland, which was connected to a famous ritual which Crowley undertook in 1899, conjuring up these demons. And the ritual was never properly completed, and they are said to have remained within Boleskine House. And Jimmy Page bought this place in 1971. He was obsessed with all the works of Crowley. And there's lots of dark occultic elements to the Led Zeppelin story. But Stairway to Heaven is their most famous track. And there's a section in it where, in the lyric, which goes, "If there's a bustle in your hedgerow, don't be alarmed now. It's just a spring clean for the May Queen." When you play it in reverse, it comes out as, "Here's to my sweet Satan," and other lines to that effect. And an incredible thing about this is you can go to Led Zeppelin's Wikipedia page, and it actually talks about this. It talks about the controversy of this backwards message in Stairway to Heaven, and it gives you a little snippet of the audio where it occurs going forwards, and it also gives you a little snippet of the audio played backwards, so anyone can listen to it for themselves and make up your own mind. And to me, it certainly sounds as if that's what's going on. And I always put this one in here to remind me to talk about this. A lot of folk might have seen a video on YouTube where there's some audio of Obama in one of his campaign speeches in 2008. And it's one of his "Yes, we can" mantras. And somebody worked out that if you play the video in reverse, every time he says, "Yes, we can, yes, we can," it comes out as, "Thank you, Satan, thank you, Satan." That's another one which, if you've never seen it, you can check it out for yourselves. It's on YouTube. You just type in "Obama, thank you, Satan," you'll find it. You can make up your mind as to what's going on then. And, of course, skeptics, when it comes to this subject area, will say, you hear what you want to hear. If you set out to hear a satanic message in an audio recording, you'll make yourself hear it. You know, they're not having it. I recently came across the work of this guy. His name is John Kelly, and he operates out of Vancouver, Canada. He runs a website called yourinnervoice.com. And his work is very much based on the work of an earlier guy by the name of David John Oates. He's Australian, and he came out in the 1980s with a technique which he refers to as reverse speech therapy. He used to appear on Art Bell's radio show quite a lot back in the day, so a lot of people might be familiar with his work from that. But this guy, John Kelly, has picked up on that whole area. And reverse speech therapy involves getting people who have issues that they need to resolve. Maybe they've got deeply embedded traumas that they need to address. And he gets them to speak onto an audio tape, speak into a microphone for any length of time, talk about anything they want to talk about, just let it flow, freestyle. And what he does then is he reverses the recordings and sits there painstakingly for ages, listening to all this stuff backwards. And it all sounds like nonsense at face value, but he's able to detect the true thoughts and the true intent and what's really on the minds of these people in the form of backwards messages, in the form of how these things come out. And this form of therapy says that your true thoughts and your true emotions come out in reverse while you're speaking. I listened to a radio show with him, Radio 314, which is part of the Red Ice network, and he was being interviewed on that, and he gave a couple of examples of clients that he's had that have spoken these truths in reverse. And one of them was a woman who for years has carried the guilt of the fact that when she was a little girl, she was supposed to be crossing the road with her little brother, and she was holding his hand, but he slipped out of her grip and ran into the road, and he was knocked down by a vehicle and killed. And she's carried that guilt of having let go of him all her life. And in the midst of this audio recording that the guy made, you can hear in reverse this phrase coming out, "Better hold on to him." He gives another example. There's this small business guy that is trying to make it work in the world of business. And he's had failed companies, and he's finding it a real struggle. And he's desperate to get on the ladder and make a success of his business. And in the midst of all this backwards stuff that you hear him speaking, comes out the phrase, "Hurry, life is just a game." And it would appear that this stuff really works, and that there is some validity to true meaning and true intent and true messages coming out in the form of backwards audio. And then we're reminded of one of the central teachings of Aleister Crowley. In his book of Magic, one of the famous phrases there, "Let him train himself to think backwards." The full passage goes on to say, "Let him train himself to hear phonographic records in reverse," which appears to add a lot of weight to the idea that there's something in the phenomenon of backmasking. Of course, there are examples of musicians and producers putting stuff into audio recordings just to have a laugh, for pranks. I think a lot of the Beatles stuff was put in just for prank value. But I think that in certain recordings, there's stuff coming through that was never consciously intended to be there by the music makers, but it's found its way into these vocal recordings, because that's the way this science works. It's reversal. When I first started researching this whole area, I did tend to think that all these strange manipulations and all these mind control elements and all the symbolism was a fairly recent phenomenon, so it'd been happening in the last 8 to 10 years or so. But as I did the research and delved further and further into it, it becomes clear that the signs of the hidden hand go back decades, and they go back to the very start of the popular music industry, basically. There's stuff about Elvis Presley. Elvis was supposed to have been an undercover government agent working for various different facets of the American government. You know, there's all sorts of theories about that. That's before you get into him faking his death, but we don't have time for that today. But the Beatles, I usually spend a bit of time talking about the Beatles because they're a fascinating group to get into when it comes to all the stuff that we're talking about today. Here's a very early publicity shot where you can see that half the faces are shaded, highlighting the one eye. So we've got that one eye symbolism again, you know, evoking the all-seeing eye and the third eye, the pineal gland. Another image very much enjoyed by the music industry. So I guess people do know who this fella in the middle is. I wasn't sure how much familiarity there would be in the United States with the antics of Jimmy Savile. This guy, you mentioned this guy's name in the UK and you get a reaction straight away. For anyone that doesn't know, this guy, Jimmy Savile, was exposed 3 years ago as a grotesque serial paedophile, child rapist, necrophiliac, and God knows what else. And he'd been carrying on much of this activity on the premises of the BBC, funded by taxpayers. In the UK, we have to pay to watch TV, and the tax goes straight to the BBC. And this guy was employed by them for about 50 years, and it came to light only after his death that he'd been sexually abusing kids in his dressing room on BBC premises. And he'd also been having sex with dead bodies in hospital mortuaries. Nice man. But interesting how he crops up all over the bloody place. See, I told you I'd say bloody. In the music industry. Here he is with the Beatles, and it turns out that for a time Savile was the road manager for the Beatles. He used to drive them around to gigs. So there's just one strange aspect of them. Here's the sleeve to the Yellow Submarine album, and we see a couple of familiar symbols, signs that we've encountered before. You've got McCartney, or is it? Don't worry, we'll get there. McCartney doing the sixth sign, and Lennon, he can't work out which way round to do the Baphomet thing, so he did it both ways. Here's the sleeve to Sgt. Pepper, the iconic Beatles album. They've lined up a bunch of characters in the background they called our heroes, our inspiration. And there in the top left is Aleister Crowley, no less. Very much the original rock star. You know, he was into mind-altering drugs, hedonistic sex. So, you know, the original sex, drugs, and rock and roll guy, really. And of course, we get into this theory known as Paul is dead. And for anyone that's not encountered this one, it's the idea that the real Paul McCartney died in 1966 and was replaced by an imposter that's been playing the part all this time. When you first hear it, it sounds ridiculous, I know.
It does.
But when you get into the research, and when you look at some of the forensic evidence, and you look at some of the symbols and the clues, and when you're armed with a knowledge of some of the stuff that does go on in the entertainment business and in the wider world, such as people being taken out, such as symbolism, giving clues as to things that have happened, it does take on an air of plausibility. I can never say one way or the other whether this happened. I don't know, very few people can. Only the very small group that would have been involved in this deception, if it took place in 1966, know for sure. Everyone else is left with their best guess and their intuition. But I mention it because I think it's something worth people considering. We have a picture here of a young original Paul McCartney, and we have a picture here of the guy who most of us understand to be Paul McCartney post-1966. Is that the same guy?
No, there's forensic evidence that it's not.
Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'll leave people to ponder on that one, but I don't have time to go into it in any further detail, but it's an original music industry conspiracy theory and another strange aspect of the Beatles. The Rolling Stones are not to be outdone. Loads of dark occult elements to the Stones, and they just happen to be friends with Jimmy Savile as well. And the Rolling Stones were very closely associated with a filmmaker by the name of Kenneth Anger. And he made sort of homoerotic and satanic films in the late 1960s and 70s. His two most famous films were Lucifer Rising and Invocation of My Demon Brother. Mick Jagger did the soundtrack to the latter, and the Stones were, very closely affiliated with the works of Kenneth Anger. The Stones put out this album, Their Satanic Majesty's Request. The sleeve was a bit of a rip-off of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper, but lots of interesting imagery there. A blood-red satin hovering overhead, Jagger in his wizard's hat, and all sorts of other stuff going on. And here we have the original founder of the Rolling Stones, Brian Jones, the guy in the front there with the devil's fork. He was the guy that originally put the Stones together. He was born into a military intelligence family, and his father worked for GCHQ in Cheltenham, England, which is Government Communications Headquarters. It's like the British equivalent of the NSA. And it's one of so many interesting examples of prominent rock stars just happening to come from families where the father worked for the intelligence services or the military or some branch of the government. Brian Jones died at the age of 27, as so many others did, when he was found face down in his swimming pool in very mysterious circumstances. And just before we leave him, there he is leaving one of his court cases for a drugs bust. And on the back of his car, you can see the registration plate reads 666. Just one of those things. And there's Aleister Crowley, original rock star. There's Jimmy Page at Boleskine House. I knew he was there somewhere. That was Crowley's residence on the shores of Loch Ness, where all sorts of strange stuff is said to have taken place. And just before we leave Savile, there he is with Elvis. Told you he got everywhere. And one more. This sick, twisted abomination of humanity, pictured here with Jimmy Savile. That one goes down well in England, I tell you. Oh, and Elvis throwing up the 6 sign. Just staying with the 60s for a moment, there's an author by the name of Dave McGowan that has put out... You know him. He's done a lot of work into the Laurel Canyon district of Los Angeles, and the fact that this community spawned so many of the prominent musicians of the late 60s, mid to late 60s, hippie, counterculture, anti-establishment era. You look at so many of the big names of that time, from the Doors to the Mamas and the Papas to Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young to Frank Zappa to the Beach Boys to the Byrds to Buffalo Springfield, Captain Beefheart, and they all just happen to have emerged out of this Laurel Canyon community in Los Angeles, which had no kind of musical heritage prior to 1965, no kind of musical activity there at all, but all these artists just happened to come from there and just happened to dominate that particular era, along with LSD and acid that was everywhere at the time, and the Vietnam War bubbling away in the background, great times of social change in the US. And McGowan has dug into the family backgrounds of all these musicians, and he's discovered that, without exception, the fathers of all these prominent musicians just happened to come from some kind of military, intelligence, governmental department background in some way or other. Frank Zappa's father was a chemical weapons engineer. And the classic example is Jim Morrison of the Doors, whose father was this guy, Admiral George Stephen Morrison. And he was the naval commander that just happened to be on deck at the time of the Gulf of Tonkin incident, or non-incident, which springboarded America into a ground war in Southeast Asia. Who knew that about Jim Morrison's father? And what a rebellious, iconic rock star who was supposedly anti-war and anti-establishment coming from this type of family background? It raises interesting questions about how organic and how natural that whole hippie counterculture movement was, or whether it was in fact an exercise in social engineering, which was being dictated by these military intelligence services through the families to lead the young people of that time in a certain direction and prevent them from becoming activists against the Vietnam War, and just to completely shape their whole mental outlook on things at that time. It will be a classic example of that. Getting into the nature of the contract that artists sign in exchange for a life of fame and fortune, in exchange for their celebrity. You hear these claims that people sign contracts in their own blood. It wouldn't surprise me if that turns out to be the case. And as we heard from Clint Richardson yesterday, and so many other researchers point out the fact that we are all sold into bondage and slavery by means of our birth certificate, by our parents when we're born, because they know no better. Unwittingly, they enter a contract with the state, and they create a corporate entity, a legal fiction version of the real flesh and blood you. And that corporate entity becomes the property of the Crown Corporation of London, England, and it operates under their system of maritime law, admiralty law. So from that point, you are considered collateral, the property of the state, and you spend your working life paying taxes to pay off the debt that governments have with these private banking cartels, such as the Federal Reserve, Bank of England, and all the rest of them, unless you get wise and opt out. When it comes to the music industry, I think they take things even a stage further. And I think that when you sign on the dotted line with the dark forces that run these industries, you are literally becoming their property. You have sold your soul, and they consider that they own you from that point on, and they can do whatever they want with you. And it's only then, as an artist, that you discover the real nature of what it is you've got into, and the fact that there's no way out. And so you get examples of celebrities who are co-opted to do things other than their main core work. So you have Bono, who's supposed to be a rock star, Olivia Wilde, supposed to be an actress, and Richard Branson, who is David Icke in disguise, according to Dallas Goldberg. He's David Icke in disguise. He's a busy fella, that one. There was this campaign a few years ago called Strike, and it was all about saving water. Don't flush the toilet every time you go, save some water. It was a Matt Damon project. And it's obvious that these people have just been put up there as the PR agents for this scheme, and you go into it and you realise that most of these schemes are connected with Agenda 21 and the UN and eugenics. That's what it's all about. These people don't really care, they're not philanthropists, you know, there's an agenda going on. And when it comes to Bono, they say you can judge a man by the company he keeps. So you can make what you will of him from that lot. Friends in low places. Don't get me started on Bono. I normally do another joke there. Bono is Gaelic for cunt. And here we have Puffy and Jay-Z at a bloody Obama rally doing what they're told to do. There's Jay-Z and Beyonce meeting him. Because, you know, that always happens, doesn't it? Rock stars and presidents, they go hand in hand. Here's Will.i.am. Yes, we can, but only if our masters tell us it's okay. Stooges, the lot of them. Puppets doing what they're told, because they have no choice. Robert Plant of Led Zeppelin, what is he, 70 years of age, doing the Ice Bucket Challenge, because everyone else is. You know, so he has to be part of the crowd and do what he's told. it must be horrific to be directed in all these things and have no free will decisions. Bob Dylan, people might be familiar with this sort of latter-day interview with Dylan, where he was asked, what's the secret behind his longevity? How's he been in the industry for so long? And he famously says, I made a deal a long time ago, and I'm keeping up my end of the bargain. And the interviewer says, who did you make the deal with? And he says, the man upstairs, or the commander-in-chief, he says. And then the interviewer says, the commander-in-chief of this world? And he says, this world, the other world, and everywhere else. And when artists aren't being puppeteered and manipulated and controlled by coercion, there's another way that they keep artists down with the program and upholding the agenda. And that's where we get into the world of trauma-based mind control. This is what Fritz Springmeier talks about. And there are many examples of artists who would appear to be victims of this technique, if you want to call it that. It's a division of MKUltra, which came over to the US with the Nazi scientists that were smuggled out of Germany at the end of the Second World War. There are divisions of it. One of them is known as monarch programming, and this is one that we see at work in the entertainment business over and over again. It's absolutely rife in Hollywood. Roseanne Barr, the actress, has come out and done a series of interviews talking about how MKUltra is prevalent among Hollywood actors. And in the music business, we have artists like Britney Spears. And a few years ago, she went a bit crazy, shaved off all her hair, and started attacking cars with umbrellas. And people at the time were saying, what's gone wrong with Britney? She's gone a bit crazy. Why do these stars all act this way? Well, when you get into the world of mind control and these traumas that are inflicted on these artists, usually at a very early age, when they're still children, when their mind is still forming, it causes the mind to shatter into these different compartments. And these people dissociate from reality. It's known as dissociative identity disorder. And it creates these different compartments or alters of the mind that can each be programmed with a different personality. And these personalities can be triggered by a phrase or a colour or a pattern. And then they can be sort of slotted back into the recesses of mind when they're no longer required. And this is what's been happening. Many of the artists involved just happen to come out of the deeply satanic Disney Corporation. And there's the Mickey Mouse Club, which is the sort of talent school offshoot of Disney. And Britney Spears was part of that, as was Justin Timberlake, you see at the top right, and Christina Aguilera, all in the same year, just happened to have come out of Disney. And what you hear is that a lot of this programming actually goes on Disney premises, Disney World and such, in underground bases. Don't know if it's true, but that's what's said. And you have lots of symbols which indicate the presence of mind control, and particularly modern programming, when you know what you're looking for. Brilliant site called Vigilant Citizen, vigilantcitizen.com goes into all this. One of the symbols that you see time and time again is, strange as it may sound, Mickey Mouse ears. Seems a ridiculous fashion statement, but you see a lot of artists wearing Mickey Mouse ears. And it's a very dark way of kind of mocking these individuals that have been part of mind control programs. This is Peaches Geldof, daughter of Sir Bob Geldof, who died in mysterious circumstances last year, I think it was. And she was a prominent member of the OTO, one of the secret societies that Alice Crowley was deeply involved with, and many musicians, it turns out, are members of OTO, so some strange stuff going on there. There's one of her babies wearing the Mickey Mouse ears, which I find deeply disturbing. Nicki Minaj. Lots to say about Nicki Minaj. One of the other indicators of the presence of modern programming mind control is pink hair and the invocation of Barbie dolls, because these female victims are kind of considered to be dolls themselves because of the manipulation that's taken place and the the fact that they've dissociated from reality. And when you see images like this with pink hair, bringing to mind Barbie dolls, it's a surefire indication of what's been going on. Nicki Minaj actually has alters which come forth in her interviews and on her records. They make no secret of it. One of her alternative personalities is known as Roman Zelensky, which is a play on the name of Roman Polanski, the film director. But this character has actually appeared on her tracks. She says it's a gay male character known as Roman. She did a track called Roman's Revenge, all about him. She will do interviews, and all of a sudden she will switch into this Roman Zelensky character, this alternative personality. Another one that she does is the British girl. She will start talking with a sort of London society girl accent. She will slip in and out of it in interviews. And people hearing it think it's hilarious, they think it's great, they think it's really entertaining. But they have no idea what's really going on. Britney Spears, in interviews, has often slipped into this British girl routine. She talks with a London society girl accent. Another artist that's done that is Mariah Carey. And in each case, when you study the accents, the voices sound exactly the same. And they're bringing out these characters seemingly out of nowhere and for no apparent reason. But it certainly seems to be a common thread between these artists in terms of some of the alternative personalities that come out. As a result, I would suggest, of mind control techniques. They mind control the artists so that they in turn can mind control the general public. And this was from a video of Nicki Minaj alongside B.O.B. and it was called Out of My Head. Not even trying to hide it. She's in a straitjacket in a mental institution with all kinds of weird scrawlings on the wall. Totally in your face. There's Mariah Carey with a monarch butterfly, and monarch butterflies are a classic piece of symbolism which ties in with the whole monarch programming agenda. Fritz Springmeier may well get into it later. And here's a story about Mariah Carey going a bit crazy. In 2001, she went a bit mad and she attempted to commit suicide. They said she suffered a nervous breakdown. Many of the same hallmarks of what happened with Britney Spears and what's happened recently with Justin Bieber and many other artists. You see lots of parallels going on there. An article from Vigilant Citizen which talks about an aspect of the programming, and they involve popular films and popular books such as Alice in Wonderland, Alice Through the Looking Glass, and The Wizard of Oz. These are used as triggers for the mind control in many cases. And this passage talks about the use of The Wizard of Oz and the idea of going over the rainbow to the happy place, which symbolises the dissociation from reality. And then you remember that Mariah Carey put out an album involving her going over the rainbow. Yes. Miley Cyrus, another output from the Disney Corporation. She was Hannah Montana. She was this squeaky clean girl next door, wholesome character for many years. And then they switched her up and they turned her into this sort of pornographic slut. And they stick her out on stage at the Grammy Awards. And just for good measure, they stuck Robin Thicke out there with his mind control trigger Masonic suit, And this is Robin Thicke's initiation into the upper echelons of the industry. They're all required to take part in these rituals. They dress it up as entertainment, but they are occult rituals. And who watches these? Primarily kids. Young girls are following Miley Cyrus. Her fan base is probably girls of the age from 8 to maybe 15, something like that. And this is considered just fine and completely appropriate for that kind of customer base. As is this, Miley Cyrus stage show, giving a blowjob to a CPR doll, a blow-up doll. Nice. Who likes to think of their 8-year-old daughter watching that? Not me. And of course they have ways of getting rid of artists that don't go along with the agenda. And on that note, a couple of interesting instances involving Tupac and Notorious B.I.G. and their murders back in the 90s. A short while before Tupac was taken out in September 96, he took on this alter ego, this artist name of Machiavelli, which is a play on the Italian scholar and writer Machiavelli, who wrote The Art of War and many others. And he called it the Don Illuminati, and it depicted Tupac being crucified on the sleeve. A few months later, he was gunned down in a hail of bullets in a car, but nobody saw anything. Then 6 months later, March 97, you had the Notorious B.I.G. put out the album Life After Death. In it, he's wearing a funeral suit, standing next to a hearse. A few weeks later, he was gunned down in a hail of bullets, but nobody saw anything. And I think those two assassinations were symbolic of the overall downfall and degeneration and degradation of the whole genre of hip-hop. Because many other DJs and many music fans that I've spoken to agree that things just went completely to the cesspit from 97 onwards. And in the genre now, you've just got these retarded lyrics talking about, the only subjects you ever hear talked about are girls with fat butts, champagne, Gucci suits, gold rims, guns, partying, and that's about it. Nothing conscious, nothing meaningful. It used to be there, but not since 97. This is the sort of stuff we get now. These are the sort of lyrics that kids are listening to and thinking, this is the real deal, man. This is hip-hop. These hoes love me like Satan, man. Why do the hoes love Satan in the first place? Nicki Minaj, Anaconda, you know, there it is. Great stuff for kids. The degeneration of Kanye West. I won't go into it in detail, but Kanye is the ultimate example of a degraded artist, systematically degraded. Here's a lyric from his first album: the prettiest people do the ugliest things on the road to riches and diamond rings. And here's the type of straight garbage he's talking these days. What happened? There was a meeting just up the road in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1969. And it was a group called Planned Parenthood, part of the Rockefeller Foundation, eugenics movement. And it was a bunch of pediatricians, and they were being addressed by this guy, Dr. Richard Day, and he was talking about changes that were going to occur in society in the coming decades. And part of what he spoke about was this: music will get worse and will be used for indoctrination. And I would say he's right on the money. So, there's been a lot of heavy stuff in there, and it's easy to get down about it, but I never like to leave things on a negative note. I never like to leave people going away thinking we're all fucked, which you easily could. The key to ending all this is becoming aware of what's being done to us, and taking all these manipulations out of the subliminal mind into the conscious mind, where it can be understood and properly processed. And I feel that when you understand the tactics that are used, and when you have them pointed out to you, you can no longer allow them to have that magical effect on you. It's the same as learning how an illusionist or a stage magician does their show. As soon as you learn how they achieve the trick, you will no longer be fooled by it. You'll never see it the same way again. So the key to it is vast awareness among large groups of people as to what's being done, and the tricks will no longer work. They're not going to be able to carry this stuff on forever. They're not going to be able to stage their false flag hoaxes with actors forever, because people are getting wise to it. And the more people talk about it, the more they expose it, the more difficult it's going to be for them. Conscious music is available. It's not just garbage out there. There's great music still being made. There's some incredible artists. Heard a couple of them on the open mic last night. St. Pete, PCT, and others. And I do this podcast every fortnight called The Sound of Freedom, which is where I unearth a whole bunch of conscious, meaningful music from artists who are switched on, they're awake, they understand what's going on, and they articulate it in their music. And their music is uplifting, it's inspiring, it makes you feel good, and it makes you realise you're not alone, you're not crazy, there's others that are seeing things the same way as you. So you can get this on iTunes, you can get it from my website, which is markdevlin.co.uk, it's on SoundCloud also. I'm writing a book which is to be called Musical Truth. It's bringing together everything that I've found so far. I'm looking to get that out early part of next year. And I want to thank Bob and John for putting on an amazing event. Bob is a great host. He's the new Bill Hicks. And I want to thank my dude Ivan from Phoenix, who is the guy that was the catalyst for getting me involved in this conference. So, thank you for listening.